But this is not the only new manga that came out in Shonen Jump recently, because the English Shonen Jump has once again published a new RWBY manga, this time by Bunta Kinami, called RWBY, the official manga. And Colton, I want to hear you explain the premise of this chapter and your thoughts on the chapter as someone who is a newbie to RWBY.
Man, I feel like I'm being given a pop quiz in class. Okay, so there's a girl named Ruby. She is attending this school to learn how to be a huntress.
What's the name of the school?
Oh, I forget the name. I forget the name of the school.
That's okay. Continue.
Yeah, she's basically going to a school to learn how to be a huntress. And there was a whole bunch of other stuff that, like, basically explained the world. I think they explained, like, what dust is. It's basically like how they get their powers or something. I read this like 2 weeks ago, so that's why my memory's kind of fuzzy.
Yourself.
Yeah, I wasn't expecting this. Like, that's kind of what the first chapter of RWBY was. Like, it's basically just, to me, it was a lot of setup. It was a lot of setup for, like, mostly the lore of the series, and I have to be honest, that kind of stuff I have a hard time, like, getting myself interested in. Mm-hmm. I don't know what it is. But yeah, that's basically what I got out of the first chapter.
All right, and what are your opinions of the characters?
I don't know if I have much of an opinion of the characters, because they don't, like, I can't really say that they're, like, good or bad characters, because, like, I've only just been introduced to them. Like, you know, RWBY seems like, you know, I don't want to say your typical main character, because I don't want to be too super dismissive, but, like, you know, she seems to be, like, you know, like, she's the main character, like, she's gonna be the best there ever was or whatnot. And she has a fun, teasing older sister who is kind of cute, and, you know, who you kind of wish was your big sister, because she's just that cool. And then you have the tsundere, whose name Waishni, right?
Yeah.
That's a character that my friends constantly talk about, because I have a lot of friends in my friend group who love the shit out of RWBY, and every time they talk about it, like, it just kind of it seems like gibberish to me. See, the thing is, like, as somebody who, like, doesn't really know anything about RWBY, and I have to be quite honest, I don't know if I'm really that interested in getting into, like, the show. I would at least read more of the manga version, you know, if this turns out to be, I don't want to say, like, I don't necessarily want it to be, like, one for one like the show, but I want it to be a good enough telling of the original show to where, like, you know, whatever people get out of the show, I want to be able to get out of from reading the manga version, if that makes sense. Like, I kind of want to have the same experience, but not, like, the completely same experience. Like, the same enough experience to kind of understand why people like the franchise, I guess.
Okay.
So I'm open to reading more of it. Like, to be quite honest, like, the very storybook kind of aesthetic that they kind of go with the art, like, really kind of, like, keeps my attention.
Yeah, I really like that aspect of it too.
It's just because I know, like, that's kind of the gimmick of the show, is that, like, it's like the characters in the setting and whatnot are based off of, like, you know, Western folklore and fairy tales and whatnot, which I find kind of interesting. You know, dating back to, like, the very first trailer for RWBY, which I thought was really, really, really cool. And I don't know. It's really hard for me to, like, I don't have, like, complete opinions on it, because I feel like, again, the first chapter is a lot of setup. Like, I don't feel like I've had enough time with the characters per se yet, or the world, to really have, like, a full opinion on the story yet. But the manga version is interesting enough to where I would consider reading more of it.
Okay, so it has at least made you more intrigued about RWBY. How would you compare it to your impressions of the previous RWBY manga published in Shonen Jump?
I think I only read like one chapter of that, and like honestly, I remember when we first covered that manga on the show that like, you know, you didn't have a lot of very positive things to say about the series, unfortunately, and it honestly made me not want to check out the rest of it.
Yeah.
So I guess compared to the first chapter of that series, like, you know, again, like the first chapter of this new series doesn't really give me a whole lot to work off of, like as far as like what my opinion of the franchise is, but like it's like I guess it feels more cohesive than the previous manga series because obviously this new series is based off the show.
Yeah.
And so it gives me a better sense of what the series is, whereas the last series, like, you know, if you presented that to a new fan, I don't think they'd really have a good idea of what RWBY actually is.
Yeah, this manga starts at the beginning and explains everything about the world of the show, and the previous one was not as accessible to newcomers at all.
Yeah, which honestly was probably the big reason why I kind of ultimately decided to stop reading it, because I just wasn't really that interested.
Mm-hmm. So, my impressions of this manga as a fan of RWBY, I was not terribly impressed by it. I like the storybook aesthetic a lot. I think that gives the manga a lot of charm and is very well in tune with the themes of the show while still having a different aesthetic from it that sets it apart really nicely. But this chapter is also just an abridged version of the first 3 episodes, and while that means that it, you know, communicates all the necessary information you need to know about the characters and the exposition of the world, you know, so it provides all the setup, like you said, Colton, but it doesn't provide too much glimpse of character beyond RWBY and a little bit of Yang, removing a lot of the comedic beats and a lot of just like downtime moments between characters beyond like the most important stuff, which is mostly what's kept in this chapter. I think that does remove a lot of characterization and character building that I feel, you know, makes reading the manga version less entertaining. Now, the art and aesthetic is more consistent within this first chapter than it is in the first 3 episodes of RWBY, because early RWBY, the first season, has some floaty animation and it skips a lot on background characters. Like, background characters are literally just shadows, like silhouettes of what people would look like, and the only characters that would, you know, be fully rendered and like actually animated would be the, you know, main characters in the scene. So in lieu of those kind of shortcuts from the show, the manga has its own weird shortcuts in that, like, the backgrounds are very sparsely defined, and that creates some confusion when I'm reading it and trying to follow action scenes or like scenes where like something is happening but they don't show it on panel but off screen. Like the moment where RWBY bumps into like Weiss's luggage cart, we are not shown RWBY bumping into that luggage cart. It's like we see a picture of the sky, and then we hear like a bunch of sound effects and crashes and dialogue, and then we see a panel of like, like Weiss's suitcases are on the floor and stuff, and I guess RWBY's sitting on the floor, but like we don't. It's really hard to figure out what's going on in that scene. I knew what's going on because like I've watched the series, but like, you know, it's kind of difficult to figure out just at first glance what just happened, and so there's some confusion there in terms of like beats in the show, like where characters are in the space of a scene, what's happening during action beats. So the fact that the backgrounds are not very well defined creates this sense of like the characters are kind of like floating in space or just placed in whatever position, just without a real sense of like where they are in relationship to each other, and like where characters are going when they leave panels, like what is happening, or like how a location even looks is really hard to figure out because it's so sparsely defined. And then there's like this moment where like there's a scene where like Ozpin, the dean of the school, he's giving like this school assembly stuff, and it's really hard to figure out like the floor, like what's going on there. Like, is it, because you could see like, is this like a lake? Because it's really hard to figure out like what that, you know, he's in this auditorium, but like the floor doesn't really look like a floor because it's like not very, it's like it's mostly white space, but then we have like these shadows here from like the walls, and it kind of looks more like water. And then we have like what's supposed to be a crowd of people here, but like they're not very well defined. They look like this could be just shading for like a rock cliff and stuff. Like obviously it's supposed to be an auditorium, because like the location isn't like really clearly defined, and because like the characters are not very clearly defined, it's like easy to get lost in the art and kind of be confused with like what you're actually looking at. And also I think there's some confusion just with the character designs in general. Like Yang and Weiss with her hair down look really similar, and I was confused when I was reading, like, oh, did Yang get on the bed, like, or is this Weiss now? So I was getting confused between them towards the end of the chapter, and that to me could be a problem going forward if, like, I don't know. So I'm having some problems with the art, and then the story, of course. I know the story of RWBY, and it's gonna take a bit before it gets to the parts of RWBY where it really, really picks up going through the first season story and whatever. So we'll see. I mean, just the fact that, you know, I've watched the show and like know the story, like unless the manga does something different with the story, or there's something really impressive with the art that makes it feel like, oh, this is a really unique experience. As a fan, I don't know if there's like too much in it for me reading this series, other than the fact that I like RWBY, and so I like the story, and so I would read it just for that reason. But like, I'm not getting more out of it than I would if I were just to watch the show. Even with the jankiness of the first season, I think I would prefer watching the show to reading the manga, because I feel like I still am getting more with the show than I am with the manga.
Yeah, and like I said, as somebody who has seen none of the show, this first chapter is basically just a primer for someone like me who doesn't really know much about RWBY, but you know, if you want a quick, like, oh, hey, here's what the world's all about, here are your characters, I guess let's go from here, essentially. So I'm mostly interested in reading it just to see if, like, I get anything out of it as, I guess, a newbie to RWBY, for lack of a better word. So yeah, I might actually keep up with this, because I'm curious.
That's good. I don't know how I'd rate it in comparison to Shiro Miwa's, because Shiro Miwa's manga, I like the art a lot more, but like the story content was very hit or miss. There were some chapters that I found really interesting, but then other chapters I just did not think were, like, when he was just recreating like the story from like the character trailers, I was like, what is the point of this? You're not adding anything to this. In fact, you're subtracting, because those trailers were at least showcased the series' really cool animation and stuff. So I don't know how I'd really compare this with Miwa's yet. I feel like I'm going to end up liking this more, but I guess we'll see like how it handles the rest of the story going forward. I would definitely say that the best RWBY manga is the anthology series, but those are not accessible to newcomers. It's mostly for fans, like, to appreciate, oh, here are these in-between stories that you didn't get to see in the show, like Team RWBY hanging out with that one team they fought in the tournament, and those guys who what were the names, like the team that had Neon in it. Those characters, like that's fun, you know. So yeah. So yeah, I would say that the best RWBY manga is the anthology, but again, you really need to be a fan of RWBY to really appreciate that.